Revenge with Karen.
You're Jennifer, right? The one who used to run training? That's what the new hire asked me as I was digging printer toner out of a cardboard box at 7:42 a.m. on a Tuesday. Not Director Jennifer. Not even Miss Lang. Just used to. Like I was some faded department store Santa nobody warned him about. I smiled. Still do, depending on who you ask. He chuckled, awkward, like I was telling a joke. I wasn't. 12 years. That's how long I'd been building this company's spine, hiring protocols, onboarding systems, training ladders. Hell, I wrote the damn employee handbook before HR knew what an org chart was. And now I was squatting next to a supply cabinet, getting mistaken for the help. Welcome to People Development, also known as the department no one remembers until morale craters or a lawsuit shows up. Don't get me wrong, I didn't need applause. Never did. Watching execs I trained promote each other over drinks at faux authentic whiskey bars while I got birthday cupcakes in the break room. That's a specific flavor of humility. And yet I stayed. Because deep down, I believed in what I built. In the idea that training wasn't overhead, it was legacy. Turns out, legacy doesn't fit on a balance sheet. But layoffs, oh, those make great bar graphs. The joke started in year 5. Jennifer's a lifer, queen of the onboarding jungle. Don't mess with her. She's probably got dirt on everyone. I smiled through them. Let them think I was the harmless office auntie who brought donuts and laminated sign-in sheets. Let them forget I had access to every executive's Myers-Briggs results and resignation timelines. Let them overlook the equity clause I'd negotiated back in the dinosaur days. Our CEO still used Hotmail and begged us to take equity instead of cash bonuses. Most of the other VPs laughed and flipped theirs. I kept mine. Quietly, carefully. By year 8, they stopped joking and just forgot I was in the room. Meetings went from let's loop in Jen to who owns training again, like I was a ghost haunting the Google Calendar. I watched 5 bosses cycle through above me. All of them some flavor of Jake or Austin. All of them obsessed with KPIs and click-through rates and culture upgrades. All of them temporary. I outlasted them like mold on an office coffee mug. Year 10, I stopped waiting to be seen. Started investing in myself the way the company never would. Spent my weekends on Zoom with governance consultants. Hired a career strategist out of my own pocket. Paid for an executive leadership program with a name so pretentious I had to lie and say it was a yoga retreat. HR thought I was trying to find myself. They weren't wrong. The real find, a clause buried in my original agreement, a right of first refusal on any voting structure changes. Signed back when we had fewer than 50 employees. A clause the current board forgot existed. A clause I'd been quietly reinforcing through documented approvals, internal alliances, and training programs that just happened to include legal and fiduciary accountability. You know, development. Oh, and quick side note, if you're 7 minutes into this and still listening, first off, bless your overworked soul. Second, if you're one of the 95% who listens but forgets to hit that little subscribe button, do us all a favor and click it. Same with the thumbs up, it actually helps keep stories like this coming from the team. And if you don't, well, maybe Nathan's your boss too, and maybe you need to hear what's coming next. By year 12, it was the institutional wallpaper. The person you blame when Slack stops syncing or a training video has a typo. The woman who just knows stuff. I said nothing when they brought in that new CFO with a startup ego and a yacht Instagram. Said even less when he snuck a strategic advisory fee into our diversity training budget. But I logged every invoice, every receipt, every training hour mocked in leadership huddles. And I smiled, because the thing about people like me, we don't scream when the fire starts. We just pull the fireproof files from the drawer, check the bylaws, and start rewriting the ending. The new CEO, Grant with a G, arrived in a hurricane of LinkedIn quotes and cologne that smelled like regret and eucalyptus. The board practically knighted him before he walked through the damn door. Disruptive leadership, they called it. Fresh energy. Translation, younger, louder, completely untethered from the soul of the company he was supposed to run. His handshake was firm, his smile surgically white, and he introduced himself by saying, "We're not here to maintain. We're here to dominate." Then came Nathan. Nathan strutted in 3 days later, a full 28 years old with a Harvard MBA and all the emotional intelligence of a cheese grater. He wore skinny suits and looked like he photoshopped himself into his own business cards. His title, Chief of Strategy Implementation. His mission, slash, burn, optimize, his favorite phrase, legacy overhead. I became fluent in Nathan within a week. He held a culture reorg meeting where he replaced all department names with sleek new acronyms. People Development, now HPEX. Human Potential Excellence, or some nonsense like that. My team, my actual humans, looked at me like scared interns on the Titanic. I didn't have the heart to tell them we'd already hit the iceberg. Because when a guy like Nathan starts asking how much redundancy is built into a department, what he really means is, how fast can we gut you without needing to refill the chairs? 2 weeks later, my calendar went from standing meetings with department heads to syncs with interns. My budget requests went unanswered. My Slack permissions downgraded without explanation. Then came the email from Nathan's assistant, titled, Updated Role Scope Urgent Signature Needed. The PDF was 2 pages of legalese dressed up in marketing perfume. Somewhere in the middle was the bombshell. My authority over training, onboarding, and interdepartmental policy development would be transferred to strategic ops for streamlined oversight. In other words, I was being turned into a mascot, smiling figurehead for a program they'd already hollowed out. I read the document twice, laughed once, then forwarded it to a lawyer I knew on retainer. She responded with one line, "Don't sign, not yet." Behind closed doors, Nathan turned colder by the day. In meetings, he'd interrupt me mid-sentence with, "Let's keep this future-facing." If I mentioned past outcomes, he'd say, "We're not a museum." He once leaned across the table during a quarterly review and said, "Brilliant at creating systems, Jennifer. But systems get stale. We need lean energy now." I smiled and sipped my tea. Good thing I know how to compost dead weight. He didn't laugh. He never got my jokes. The team I'd mentored for years was scattered overnight. One transferred to a product role for cross-functional development. Another was invited to take a lateral move into supply chain. One was just gone, like he evaporated in the break room. I wasn't even told until I saw his mug still sitting in the dishwasher a week later. The final straw? They moved my desk, not just figuratively, literally. My corner office, glass walls, the one with the fake fern I'd kept alive for a decade, was reassigned to a new consultant named Petra, who specialized in ROI accountability. I was given a workstation near the communal printer. No door, no fern, toner fumes, and a view of the hallway where Nathan marched past daily like a hall monitor in a prestige TV drama. He stopped once, leaned on my desk, and said, "Hope you're not too attached to titles. We're all fluid now." I looked up and said, "I've never needed a title to do damage, Nathan." He grinned like I was flirting. That's when it shifted. The confusion, gone. The hurt, hardened. What replaced it was a dull, deliberate suspicion. I'd seen boys like this before. They think office politics is chess, but they play like toddlers, flipping the board when they lose. What they don't realize is I built this board. I know which tiles are glued down and which ones trigger the trapdoor. I didn't raise my voice, didn't cry in the parking lot. I simply called an old friend in legal who owed me 2 favors and a bottle of wine. Then I started reading the company bylaws again, closely, line by line, highlighting anything that looked outdated. Turns out, the foundation Nathan wanted to bulldoze. It had been built with more than bricks and email templates. It had roots. It had teeth. And I was done playing nice. I first noticed the repackaging when a monthly finance summary landed in my inbox and read like it had been run through a corporate salad spinner. Line items that used to say things like leadership coaching department, heads or compliance training vendor protocols were now condensed under vague buckets like operational support flow and intangible resources non-client facing. It was a financial word soup, and the ladle stirring it, Nathan. The kicker, my name was still all over the original approval chains. Every line now labeled non-essential or discretionary had once passed through my hands, back when the company still believed developing people was worth more than slapping slogans on mugs. And now those expenses, they were being turned into ammunition. A week later, I got a polite email from Audit Review and Risk Team asking for clarification on several entries dating back 3 fiscal years. 3 years. As if I was hoarding gold bars in the training room ceiling tiles. There was no CC to Nathan, but let's be honest, his cologne was all over that email. They wanted details on why I approved a series of one-on-one coaching sessions with a leadership consultant, and whether it was justified in terms of ROI. Rai, one of the execs that consultant trained now, ran the EMEA region. Another had successfully negotiated our largest vendor contract to date. But sure, let's debate the $1,400 invoice, while Nathan was greenlighting six figures for his data synergy acceleration pod, which as far as I could tell was just a rented WeWork space with a beanbag and a guy named Troy. I didn't answer the email, not right away. Instead, I started printing receipts, approval chains, meeting notes, slide decks with Nathan's name stamped on projects that used frameworks I designed 2 years earlier. I dusted off an old USB drive I used to joke was my burn it all down stick and started organizing. The cherry on top, a quarterly budget deck I found buried in our shared drive, stripped of my metadata, but featuring my original formatting and talking points verbatim. Someone, guess who, had just replaced the footer and slapped his name on it. Nathan had never met a mirror he didn't love. That weekend, I drove out to a lake house I co-owned with my sister. No Wi-Fi, no Slack pings, just me, 2 legal pads, and 3 bottles of dark red motivation. I made a list of every budget Nathan had touched since his arrival, cross-referenced them against legacy expenditures, highlighted every deviation, omission, or renamed category. The pattern was there. He was quietly erasing institutional memory, mine especially, replacing it with buzzwords and spreadsheets that no one would question until something broke. The doubts crept in when I reached out to HR. Casually, carefully, I asked if they could confirm my current title in the org chart, just to clear up confusion from an external partner. The woman on the line got oddly quiet before saying, let me check and get back to you. That's when I knew something was being moved. Not officially yet, but it was moving. Called my lawyer, gave her the update. She told me to keep every version of every email from here on out. No deleting, no forwarding. If they're building a paper trail, you build one too, but smarter. The next morning, I walked into the office and noticed my nameplate had been replaced. Not removed, replaced. The new one didn't say director. It said advisor, talent continuity. I hadn't been told, not even a courtesy Slack. I laughed. Out loud, loud enough that the new intern, bless his frightened heart, dropped his yogurt. I took the nameplate and slid it into my tote bag. Let them file that under non-essential. That afternoon, I got the whisper. I was in the stairwell, heading to the roof for a call, because God forbid we get cell reception on the 3rd floor, when someone called my name. It was Danielle. She was one of my former interns, now a junior manager on the marketing team. We hadn't talked much since the restructuring, but she looked nervous. Hey, she said, eyes darting. I probably shouldn't say this, but they're talking about you. Everyone talks about me, I said, mostly behind my back. Saves time, she didn't smile. Just handed me her phone, a Slack thread, not screenshots. Live. Someone had forgotten to restrict permissions. It was from a private strategy channel. Message, let's finalize the package and schedule the termination before Q4 kickoff. Preferably Friday. Don't want legacy noise dragging into planning. No name mentioned. But the message above it read, have we confirmed how to shut off access post-meeting? Would hate for JL to catch wind early. JL, Jennifer Lang. I handed the phone back slowly. Danielle said nothing, just nodded and walked away. I stood in that stairwell for a long time, longer than I should have, long enough to realize something bone deep. They weren't just erasing my title. They were preparing to erase me. They called me in at 9:01 sharp, because of course they did. That's how cowards operate. Early enough to avoid office gossip, late enough that someone else handles the fallout. The invite was titled Q for Strategic Realignment Touchpoint, which was corporate for we're about to bury you with a smile. I didn't bring my laptop. Didn't bring a notebook either, just a fountain pen I liked, black ink, sharp nib. Something about the weight of it felt correct for the moment. Nathan sat at the head of the glass conference room like a villain, auditioning for tech drama. Blue suit, no socks, ankles exposed like he'd personally defeated traditional footwear. HR sat beside him, arms folded, a printed packet on the table with my name in bold, 14-point font, the same font we used for offboarding procedures. Jennifer, Nathan said, motioning to the seat across from him. Thanks for coming in. I didn't sit. He sighed dramatically. We've concluded your role no longer aligns with our strategic direction. Effective immediately, your position is being eliminated. HR slid the packet across the table. It made that low, whispery sound, paper meeting paper, judgment meeting silence. Of course, Nathan added, this is no reflection on your past contributions, but there have been questions about some expenditures. Vanity certifications. Personal consulting sessions billed as team development. We'll skip the legalese. Bottom line, misuse of funds. The company's being generous here considering. That word vanity, it sat there daring me to react. I didn't. Instead, I uncapped my pen and signed. One flick, bottom of the first page. No hesitation. I slid the packet back, then reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my badge, placed it on the table so gently you could almost mistake it for reverence. Do what you must, I said quietly. I look forward to formally introducing myself at Monday's board meeting. The air changed. Nathan blinked. I'm sorry, what board meeting? I just smiled. No teeth, no explanation. Just that soft, haunting kind of smile people remember in their dreams and therapy sessions. HR looked up like she'd missed a memo. Ethan looked down like he suddenly remembered something he didn't read. I turned, walked out without another word. And there, right outside the glass doors, stood two security officers. One tall and silent, the other familiar. Too familiar. Derek. He'd been on the night shift for 5 years before getting promoted. I'd helped write his recommendation letter. He nodded once and held the door open. Ma'am, he said. And then lower, so only I could hear it. This is bull. Deserved better, I paused. Looked him in the eye. I did, but I'll settle for justice. He smirked. You always land on your feet. I didn't answer, just kept walking. Past the elevator. Past the fake succulents. Past the hallway where Nathan's pet project poster still hung, his new vision for operational efficiency, plastered over photos of people I'd trained. People they'd already fired. I walked straight out of the building. No boxes. No tears. No slow motion glances back. Outside, the autumn air bit through my coat like a dare. I inhaled deep. There's a particular kind of cold that wakes you up. Not in your bones, in your blood. It's the chill of war drums, of overdue retribution humming beneath your ribs. I didn't go home. Not yet. I went straight to a cafe across town. Sat in the same booth I'd met the board chair in 6 months earlier. The booth where we'd reviewed company bylaws line by line, preparing for a day just like this. I opened my leather folio. Inside were 3 things: a signed notarized voting proxy, a shareholder motion drafted by counsel, and a schedule for Monday's board meeting. I ordered coffee, black. Then I texted the chair, all set, let's make it clean. He replied within 60 seconds, see you Monday, interim CEO. I took a long sip. My smile returned. This time, it reached my eyes. By the time I got home Friday night, shock had worn off like cheap perfume in rain. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even take off my shoes right away. I walked straight to my home office, flicked on the lamp, and stared at the locked drawer that had waited for this moment longer than Nathan had probably been shaving. The key was in my wallet, taped behind an expired Panera gift card. I pulled it out, hands steady, slid it into the lock, and twisted. The drawer opened with a soft metallic sigh, like it had something to confess. Inside were 6 file folders. The first was labeled Voting Rights Legacy Clause. Inside, the original agreement from 11 years ago, signed by the founding CEO and 2 original board members, one of whom now taught part-time at Stanford, the other who'd quietly retired but never gave up her voting stake. That clause, it granted me the right to amend and co-sign governance policies in lieu of cash bonuses. No expiration, no exceptions, no NDA. They'd forgotten it existed. I never did. The second folder, shareholder holdings confirmations. My stake, 34.1%. Add in 2 trusted allies, both ex-C-suite, now advisory board members I'd mentored into power over the years, and we controlled just north of 51%. Majority rule. Silent, patient, and now legally binding. Folder 3 was my favorite, vanity expenses. Ethan had mocked my budget lines like I was collecting beads at a business Mardi Gras. But those funds, they'd gone to a corporate governance mentor out of DC. Private sessions with a legal strategist specializing in succession law, and a director boot camp that walked me through exactly how to dismantle a hostile executive structure without so much as raising my voice. Every dime approved. Every dime documented. Every unnecessary certification tied to legal protocols, merger prep, or leadership succession. My training program wasn't about onboarding rookies. It was about preparing for this exact war. The 4th folder, Bylaws Revision Board Approval. The chair and I had started the draft 9 months ago under the guise of modernizing operations. We buried it under operational redundancy mitigation, a phrase nobody questioned, redefined quorum voting procedures, and streamlined interim appointments. And most importantly, it shifted the power of executive oversight to any shareholder majority coalition, should one arise in response to leadership misalignment. Guess what? One just had. Folder 5, Monday Board MTG, Agenda, drafted, signed, filed. I wasn't just attending. I was on the docket. Line 2 read, Ownership Clause Invocation presented by J. Lang, equity partner. That meant I had the right to call a vote, on anything, including a motion of no confidence. And the last folder, it was blank, empty, but for one sticky note, Phase 2, I smiled. Then I closed the drawer. Saturday morning, I was up at 5. Drank coffee on the back porch while the sun crawled up over the edge of the yard like it was still thinking about showing up. I reread every contract, reprinted backup copies. Took them to be notarized again, just because I could. I even wore the same blouse I wore the day the founder offered me that original equity contract, navy blue, little gold stitching around the cuffs. Sentimental, maybe, but I wanted to remind the universe I didn't forget who I was. I went through the digital archives too, compiled a neat little folder of Nathan's greatest hits, every unauthorized spend, every third-party consultant who shared a surname with one of his college buddies, every instance of his restructuring plans being copy-pasted from some Forbes think piece he probably didn't read past the headline. He was efficient, all right, efficient at plagiarizing strategy decks and rebranding theft as innovation. By Sunday evening, my phone buzzed. A message from the chair, we've confirmed your slot on the agenda. Majority coalition is aligned. Legals prepared for disclosures if necessary. See you at 9 a.m. No exclamation marks. No small talk. Perfect. I laid out my outfit like a general prepping for inspection. Dark suit, tailored. No pin, no badge, no company-issued lanyard. Just presence. I'd spent 12 years being the foundation. On Monday, I was walking through that door not as a disgraced employee, but as a co-owner. And I wasn't bringing vengeance. I was bringing structure, stability, and if need be, scorched policy written in corporate fire. Monday morning, office buzzed like a hornet's nest with caffeine jitters. Someone had set out muffins in the boardroom. Blueberry, warm, the kind of subtle manipulation Nathan thought was leadership. The board was already seated by 8:55, all smiles and shoulder claps. The CFO chatted with the chair about golf swings. Petra, the consultant currently occupying what used to be my office, adjusted her blazer every 6 seconds and kept nodding at nothing. Nathan stood by the digital projector like he'd just cured debt and invented synergy in the same weekend. Q3 was explosive, he began, voice slick with confidence. Net growth up 9.2%, churn down 3.4%, and we've restructured our internal training architecture for leaner efficiency. Departmental overhead is down 40%. He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. I was the overhead. Looking ahead to Q4, building momentum. New hires in the pipeline, vendor negotiations progressing ahead of target. And before we continue, the chair interrupted, slow and firm, his voice slicing through the room like a cold breeze through a cracked window. There's one matter we'll address first. Nathan blinked. Ah, okay. Which, what item? The chair didn't answer. Instead, he turned his head slightly toward the side door. And I walked in. No name badge. No company lanyard. Just that navy suit, high heels clicking like punctuation, and a black folio in my hand. 3 board members straightened in their seats. Petra's jaw dropped, then reset. Nathan didn't turn fully to face me. He pivoted just enough to register my presence without admitting it unsettled him. Jennifer, he said, this is unexpected. Not for everyone, I replied, stepping to the table, laying my folio down like a dealer revealing the hand she's been sitting on for 12 years. Good morning. The chair didn't introduce me. He didn't have to. He simply cleared his throat again and said, per Procedural Update Section 12C, effective as of today, any equity partner holding a qualifying voting block may present a motion at the opening of session. Nathan opened his mouth to speak, closed it. I caught the micro-expression. Moment his brain started flipping through every email he didn't read thoroughly, every clause he skimmed, every optional meeting invite from legal he declined. I continued, per that clause, and as recognized equity partner, I'll be exercising that right. Motion for immediate review of departmental restructuring outcomes, budget reallocations, and executive consulting approvals in Q2 and Q3. The legal counsel, older woman named Bridget, who once told me she'd never seen a more efficient contract archive than mine, nodded without blinking. Confirmed. Motion is within rights and procedures. Nathan gave a smile I'd seen on toddlers who just pooped their pants but didn't want to admit it. With respect, he said, forcing a chuckle, I don't think we need to rehash ancient spending. We've moved forward. We're streamlined. Efficient. The chair folded his hands. Efficiency without compliance is a liability. Let's continue. Nathan sat down, not because he wanted to, but because he finally understood he wasn't standing at the head of this table anymore. I opened my folio. Inside were annotated copies of budget approvals, training session outcomes, board-ratified expense policies, all signed, all dated, all legal. I didn't gloat, simply handed out the documents like I'd done 100 times in 100 rooms, calm, direct, precise. Nathan looked over one of the pages. His smile faltered. His eyes scanned for a lifeboat. And then I saw it the moment he finally got it. The realization that this wasn't a comeback. I'd never left. I hadn't been shuffled out. I'd been moving sideways, underneath, quietly reshaping the foundation he thought he stood on. And as of 9:07 a.m., bylaws I co-wrote were no longer suggestions. They were the rules. He coughed once, glanced at Petra, who suddenly found something fascinating about her thumbnail, and leaned back just an inch too far in his chair. My hand stayed steady on the table. The chair looked down the row. Motion accepted, he said. We'll proceed with review and voting. There was no applause, no grand gesture. Just papers shuffling and Nathan trying not to sweat through his jacket. But me wasn't angry anymore. I was in position. Exactly where I was always meant to be. The air in the boardroom had that sharp, brittle quiet, the kind that crackles right before a storm, when everyone knows something's coming and no one wants to be the first to flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I just spoke clearly, slowly, and with the surgical calm of someone sharpening a scalpel in front of a man made entirely of balloon. Let's begin with the itemized breakdown, I said, opening a tabbed binder and sliding it forward. Every flagged expense related to my tenure as Director of People Development is cataloged here, cross-referenced with board-approved budgets, legacy operational protocols, and signed CFO authorizations. I glanced at Bridget, our general counsel. She gave the smallest nod. She'd reviewed the packet herself the night before, said it was bulletproof with a bow tie. Nathan cleared his throat, shifting in his seat like the cushion had turned to glass shards. These trainings, he said, voice tighter now, weren't disclosed in full detail at the time. That's what raised concerns. Incorrect, I replied, flipping to tab 3. Each training was pre-approved under Operational Growth Initiative 2017, initiated by the previous board, and extended via Clause 14B in the Legacy Charter. See the original signatures from CFO Levinson, Chairwoman Haskins, and myself. I handed out the supporting documentation. Nathan didn't reach for it, but Petra did. Her eyes moved fast. Her mouth tightened. I continued. Page 9 details external consultant partnerships, including the legal strategist I retained to advise on governance infrastructure, with chair consent. Also note the training hours logged against those expenses match perfectly with the outcomes that led to 3 strategic hires and 2 major vendor transitions. I paused, looked around the room. So if we're redefining value here, let's be consistent. Then I opened a second folder. The color changed. This one had teeth. Now let's pivot, I said, sliding new pages forward, to Nathan's consulting expenditures. Specifically, the allocation labeled Q2, Performance Architecture Advisor, a $27,000 line item paid to Performa Group LLC. The chair narrowed his eyes. I don't recall approving that vendor. Neither did legal, I said, flipping the next tab, and neither did finance. I turned to Bridget again. Would you please confirm? She leaned forward. The company has no record of Performa Group in our approved vendor list, nor does it appear in compliance archives. Nathan's face went a peculiar shade between bone and raw shrimp. I held up a page, printed from the Ohio Secretary of State's Business Registry. Performa Group LLC is registered to a one Mr. Tyler H. Crenshaw, same email domain as Nathan's linked in recommendations. Tyler also appears in photos from Nathan's 10-year Harvard reunion, tagged as roomie for life. Nathan opened his mouth. I held up a finger. Before you say it was an arm's-length transaction, Tyler's email signature matches a domain created 3 days before the first invoice, and he was paid via expedited wire, bypassing the usual review chain. Bridget turned pale. HR shifted, one of them whispering something into their iPad mic. I leaned back, So, to review, I spent company funds on authorized, board-approved leadership development. Ethan spent company funds on an unvetted shell firm owned by his best friend to create a performance architecture report that, fun fact, was mostly plagiarized from a 2018 McKinsey white paper. I tapped the final packet of slides. That's the report. Highlighted in yellow are the exact sentences lifted word for word. No one moved. Even the muffins on the table seemed embarrassed. Nathan stared at the table like it owed him an apology. I straightened my blazer, folded my hands in front of me. "You said I wasted money on training," I said, voice warm with something close to amusement. "Turns out I was preparing for your job." And that's when the chair laughed, not a polite chuckle, not a cough-disguised guffaw, a full, chest-deep laugh. He looked around the room, then down at his watch. "Well then," he said, still smiling, "shall we move to motion?" Nathan tried to speak, but the room had already moved past him. Just like I had. The chair closed the last folder with the deliberate patience of a man who knew how to detonate quietly. No fanfare, no gavel, just the soft, satisfying click of metal on paper, an ending disguised as punctuation. "Well," he said, adjusting his reading glasses and scanning the room, "we've heard the facts. We've reviewed the documentation. And unless there's meaningful opposition, I'd like to proceed with a motion." Nathan sat stone still, one hand gripping his water bottle like he was about to squeeze it into diamonds. No one looked at him. Even Petra, once his loudest echo chamber, was suddenly engrossed in her own cuticles. The chair continued, tone neutral but ironclad. Motion of no confidence in CEO Nathan R. Klein, based on findings of unauthorized financial disbursements, vendor misrepresentation, and failure to disclose conflicts of interest. He looked at me. I didn't blink. "I do not require a second from you, Jennifer. You're a party to the conflict. But the remaining voting members may now raise hands to support the motion." I didn't move. I didn't need to. One by one, hands rose. The CFO, Bridget's. Two board members I hadn't seen side with anyone in 5 years. Even the chair himself lifted his hand last, as if to emphasize how unnecessary his vote had become. It was silent, eerily so. Bridget leaned into her mic and said, "The motion carries." Majority reached. Nathan's lips parted, dry and pale. "Wait, this can't be binding. There needs to be review," the chair asked. "It's already occurred. Appeal, you'll have legal channels. But today, as of this vote, you are no longer CEO of this company." Nathan stood slowly as if fighting gravity. "I have projects in motion. Initiatives pending. We're about to enter Q4 and we'll survive it." Chair replied calmly. "It's a company, not a cult." A few suppressed chuckles passed like ghosts through the room. Nathan turned toward me, not quite with rage, not quite with disbelief. Just that hollow look of a man who'd finally realized he was never the smartest person in the building. I said nothing, didn't smirk, didn't gloat. Just held eye contact long enough to ensure he'd carry the memory. He looked to HR. They looked away. He looked to Petra. She looked at the floor. He looked to the door. And then he walked. No badge to turn in. No cardboard box of personal items. Just a man in an expensive suit walking out like a forgotten punchline no one ever laughed at. The room stayed quiet for several heartbeats after he left. Then the chair cleared his throat. "Per revised bylaws, we are obligated to appoint an interim CEO within 48 hours of a vacancy." He turned to the board. "Suggestions." Bridget spoke first. "We need someone with internal structural knowledge. Someone with compliance experience, long-term stakeholder relationships, and a proven track record of damage control." The CFO nodded. "Someone who knows the skeletons and where the exit plans are buried." The chair folded his hands, thoughtful. "Indeed. No one said my name. They didn't need to." The chair turned to me, smile faint but undeniable. "Jennifer," he said, "would you be willing to serve as interim CEO while we formalize the transition?" I didn't answer. Not yet, because the victory wasn't in being asked. It was in knowing I didn't have to ask them. The chair leaned back in his seat, folded his hands, and looked straight at me, not as a subordinate, not as some legacy fixture of the company, but as an equal. A peer. A partner in command. "Effective immediately," he said with full clarity. "Jennifer Lang will step in as interim chief executive officer while the board evaluates permanent options. Her equity position, tenure, and demonstrated leadership more than qualify her under the new bylaws. Unless there are objections." No one spoke. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. That silence, it wasn't awkward. It was reverent. The kind of hush that settles when something long overdue finally clicks into place. Then, some punchline that missed its cue by 5 minutes, Nathan burst back through the glass door, voice trembling with just enough desperation to be satisfying. You can't do this. You can't just, this isn't how things work. He pointed at me like a man trying to stop a train with a post-it note. I built Q3. I cleaned her mess. You all saw the reports. The chair didn't turn. You can address any formal concerns through counsel. But this meeting is concluded. Ethan looked around, expecting anyone to back him. But they were already gathering their folders, avoiding eye contact like coworkers after a failed office karaoke. You people are making a mistake, he said, flailing now. She's emotional. She's bitter. She's not a visionary. I stood slowly, gathered my documents into one clean, neat stack. Then I finally turned to him. Security is waiting. It wasn't a threat. It was a courtesy. Looked over his shoulder. Sure enough, Derek stood just outside the door, arms crossed. Not aggressive, just present. Nathan muttered something under his breath. Something that started with "this isn't over" but ended in nothing. Just walked out for the second and final time, suit rumpled, legacy in shambles. I waited until the boardroom cleared, until the chairs were empty, the coffee cups abandoned, and the faux confidence scent of his cologne had finally faded from the air. I walked down the hallway, past the frosted glass doors I used to avoid, past Petra's confused little desk, past the hallway where I once stood invisible while execs handed each other promotions like Halloween candy. I stopped at the door that used to be mine. No, his, now mine again. I slid in the key card. The reader blinked green. The door unlocked with a soft, obedient click. The office was untouched. His coffee cup still on the desk, half-scribbled notepad filled with buzzwords. Leverage, traction, gamify. All the empty jargon in the world couldn't save a man from forgetting who built the road beneath him. I sat down, not collapsed, not eased, sat deliberate, centered. I opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a red file folder, one I'd kept hidden behind a stack of old onboarding guides. Its label in fine black print, Succession Plan Phase 2. I placed it gently on the desk, smoothed the cover, because this was never about revenge. It was about restoration. And as I flipped it open, I whispered just loud enough for the room to hear. And just like you said, I was eliminated. From under you, not from above you. You're the real stars of the corporate jungle. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe, or I'll flick the switch on your old cubicle memories.